Welcome to Conversations with the Pastor, the hippest show in the Pacific Northwest, where we talk about current events and things that matter to you. We're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Now listen, this is an interactive conversation. That means we need you to ask questions via Facebook or pastorconversations at the NBCF.org. Don't miss out. Now let's start the conversation. Pastor?
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Conversations with the Pastor. And yes, it is a conversation, but what will make it a conversation, which is a dialogue and not a monologue, is that you let your fingers do the walking across the keys on your keyboard and send in your questions and your responses to what I know is going to be a timely and provocative conversation this evening. But before I introduce my illustrious guests, I just want to say something that makes you kind of go, In my opinion, the very worst Supreme Court decision in the history of these United States of America, and there have been a lot of them, was the 1858 Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was a runaway slave who was recaptured, returned to his slave master, and I hate to use that term, on the south of the Mason-Dixon line. The case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that no black man had any rights anywhere at any time that any white person had to respect. No black person had any rights anywhere at any time that any white person had to respect. In my opinion, it was the absolute worst Supreme Court decision ever because it showed just how demonic this nation was, how morally depraved and sinful it was when it came to treatment of non-white male citizens. Yesterday, I saw a Dred Scott type of moment in our nation's Oval Office. When I saw four white men, I saw Benjamin Netanyahu and one of his cabinet members and Donald J. Trump with J.D. Vance sitting in the Oval Office. Four white men, two Christian and two Jewish, but four white men discussing what they thought they should do with the brown people of Gaza. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they thought that they were entitled to discuss what should be done with other people, and those people not being engaged in the conversation about their own determination, is the epitome of the Dred Scott decision, that these people, brown people of Gaza, have no rights anywhere at any time that any Jewish person or the people of the United States have to respect at any time. The very definition of to be objectified is when you are acted upon. The definition of agency, to the contrary, is when you are empowered to act upon, beginning with acting upon on your own behalf. We're at a sad time in the life of our nation to have a president that's running a criminal enterprise from the Oval Office, because everything he suggested was criminal by the standard of international law. The nations came together after World War II and established some international laws that would cause the international community to not be a dog-eat-dog jungle, but a community, a league of nations that could spare itself from the carnage of World War I and World War II that saw 200 million lives lost in just Europe alone. And several of the rulings that came out of World War II that have become international law is that any lands taken by force have to be returned and sovereign boundaries must be respected, and that depopulation, forced population removal, and degrading of civilian infrastructure is by definition genocide. We've been saying since the beginning of this quote-unquote war between Israel and Hamas that it was really Benjamin Netanyahu's opportunity to do what he's always wanted to do and permanently remove Gazans from Gaza, to rid it, to de-Palestinianize Palestine and repopulate it with Israeli citizens, which they believe is their entitlement and their birthright. Jewish supremacy works the same in Israel as white supremacy works in America. And you have seen now that the American president suggesting that America would take over and own it. America legally cannot take it over. The colonialism of the last 500 years and the expatriation of the natural resources of colonized lands is illegal. In his first term, Trump suggested that we could go into Iraq and take the oil. Everyone but him knew that you can no longer expatriate the natural resources of other lands for the hyperdevelopment of your land. That's what colonialism was all about. When white Western countries sat down in 1880 in the Berlin Conference, the All-Africa Conference, white nations sat down, took a map of Africa and carved it up, disregarded tribal boundaries, made nation states, because they said, and I quote them, Africa was too rich to be left to Africans. The European empires wanted the gold, the diamonds, the palm oil, the rubber, and all of the other natural minerals, which led to the hyperdevelopment of European empires and the underdevelopment of Africa, its peoples, and its tribes, which we're still suffering from in these post-colonial days and times. You had a colonial mentality of a white male president who has never regarded any boundaries or played by any laws and has no moral compass at all, suggesting that he could just go in and take Gaza, that it has no sovereign boundaries, that he is bound to respect, that he as a white male can just go in, take what he wants, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Greenland, whether it's the Panama Canal, whether it's the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico, whether it is a woman that he can grab in her most private parts because it's an entitlement to him. That's what we tethered with the powers of the presidency. There is a scene in Black Panther 1 where Killmonger beats T'Challa within an inch of his life at the water's edge, and before he throws him off, he mocks the people who are dismayed at the defeat of their king, and he says, "This is your king? This is your king? The one who was supposed to take you into the future? This is your king? The one who was supposed to protect you? This is your king?" I say to all those people out there who pretzeled up their value system, what they said they believe, to vote for a man who told you up front he thought you ate dogs, who told you up front that you and your people brought rapists and crime and drugs, who told you up front, ladies, that he could grab you anywhere at any time, and who told white people up front it's really about taking down the cost of eggs. Though he's been in office, the cost of eggs have only gone up, and the Ukraine war is still going on. This is your king? This is the one who's supposed to unify us? This is your king? This is the one who's supposed to make America great again? This is your king? I ask the question, is anybody suffering buyer's remorse yet? If not, hold on. There's a lot more to come. Sit with that. Let me transition now to introduce my guests for this evening, as we want to talk about a very timely subject, as we've heard a wave of anti-DEI executive orders signed and rhetoric spoken and actions taken. DEI has become the boogeyman of this new administration, blamed for everything from planes falling out the air to fires sweeping over the hills in California and any and everything else. Well, today I want to introduce two people who are deeply embedded in the tech community to talk about what are the impacts of these DEI, these anti-DEI policies. And I want to welcome back to Conversations with the Pastor, a woman who is iconic in the Pacific Northwest community and in the tech industries, and that is Trish Melendez-DeZico, who is the founder of TAF, Technology Access Fund, who has spent her life creating access for people of color and Black people in particular, and is also on the board of directors for Songs of Black Folk. She's a well-rounded, holistic individual who just wants to make life better for others. I want to welcome her back to Conversations with the Pastor. Trish, welcome back. And I want to
Thank you.
I want to welcome Omar Qureshi, who is the coordinator and the director of the Artificial Intelligence Training Program that is being housed right here in New Beginnings Christian Fellowship as we speak. I want to welcome him back. This is his second time appearing on Conversations with the Pastor. Omar, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks.
Let me ask the two of you. First of all, let me go to Trish. Give us quick an overview of kind of the history and the mission of TAF and how that sits against what's happening in the country today.
Yeah, we started back in '96. I left the tech industry. My last job was at Microsoft, and my last assignment was being a senior diversity administrator. And one of my jobs was to run the high school internship program. And through that time, and all the time, the 7 years prior that I was at Microsoft, one of the things I noticed is that our kids were not getting access to technology, and the industry wasn't going to do anything about it. So I left to try to do something about it. So we started in '96 with a very simple mission to bring technology to communities of color. We started with a high school internship program where the kids came to us 2 days a week, 3 hours each time, for 8 months out of the year. And they learned how to program, develop websites, manage networks, do media production, and they got paid summer internships or access to paid summer internships. So they had to interview for them, they had to earn them. It's a very successful program. At the end of each year, they got $1,000 toward higher education. Then they would come back for more training until they graduated high school. And we ran that program 5 years in, 6 years in. One of the things that we saw was that our students, even though they had these paid summer internships and they were programming and managing networks and all of that, they were not able to get into their computer science or engineering majors because they lacked the math that they needed. And the reason they lacked the math is that they were tracked into the lower math track in their public high school. And we couldn't really go to each high school because we had kids coming from all over the county. So we started thinking, what can we do? Can we actually start a school, a public school, in partnership with the public school district and give all the kids what they need? So 2 years of planning, we did just that. And we opened the first and only public school in our state that is co-managed by a nonprofit in the school district. So today we have 8 school partners, and really our mission is to help our schools create academic environments that center on student voice and cultivate students into socially conscious and self-aware critical thinkers, problem solvers, ideators, creators, and leaders. None of that says tech. We are a STEM model, and what we want our kids to do is use those science, technology, engineering, and math skills to do whatever it is they want to do in their career, because we all need that. No longer can you pick up a hammer with your grandpa and all of a sudden you're a union worker on the job. You have to know as much as anybody else who is going to college. So one of the things that we make sure our kids understand is that we are educating them in not just on the core subjects, but we're educating the whole child. And so that's the work we've been doing. It's the work we're going to continue to do. And then we also work to get teachers of color into our public schools, because we all know once integration happened, all of our Black teachers lost their jobs. So where the industry is working so hard to bring them back, but then when they do, they don't know how to keep them because they're coming into hostile environments. So we're touching every aspect of the education ecosystem today.
Would I be presumptuous in saying that it sounds like you probably sacrificed millions of dollars worth of salary and stock options that you could have gained for yourself if you had stayed in Microsoft and other corporate settings to be about this work?
Yeah, when I look at and talk to my colleagues that I was at Microsoft with, oh yeah. But for me, it wasn't really about money. It's about my purpose on this earth. And I found my purpose. And even though, at some point I'm gonna have to leave TAF because I can't work until I'm like 80. But at some point, I'm going to leave TAF, and then whatever it is I do, it's still going to be in service of my community. So, you can have a lot of money and still be the most unhappy person in the world. I am a happy middle-class person with a beautiful family and a wonderful career.
Well, there's the old saying goes, there's two most important days in your life, the day you were born and the day you figured out why you were born.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
there's thousands of lives out there that are better because you figured out why you were born. Omari, tell us about the work that brought you to this moment.
First of all, I just wanted to acknowledge Trish and what a wonderful cause and what a sacrifice and intellect that you bring to this amazing cause.
Thank you, Omar.
So coming after, tough to follow a class act like yourself, but nevertheless, Pastor, as you know, I've been in tech for 25 years, also at Microsoft, several other tech firms, some private equity firms. And back in July, under the leadership of Eddie Wright Jr., we looked at how do we come close to fixing this gap that exists in tech sector between African Americans and Latinos, so women and minorities, and the Caucasian male and Asians, quite frankly. And you walk in the hallways of Microsoft, or any other tech firm, you will see a lot of people that look like me. You'll see a lot of white men. And you would not see a lot of folks that are African American. And it's taken a long time to perpetuate that disparity that existed. Now, before I go into the conversation of some of the root causes, let me answer the question, Pastor, you asked about the program. So Americans for Equality and their MLK Gandhi Empowerment Initiative, what we're doing is we're basically taking the quote of Dr. King, which talks about the function of education is to teach one how to think intensively and think critically. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about how, an education is about character and intelligence combined. And what we're trying to do here is bringing in some of the practical curriculum, whether it's a generative AI, cybersecurity, cloud, programming, data analytics. We also have former recruiters and current recruiters from Amazon and Microsoft that are helping our students on what is the art of going through an interview? How do you prepare yourself for a tech interview? How do you update a resume? What do you call out on LinkedIn? And all of that encompasses what we call 360, which is giving skills and also providing a lot of these soft skills that are essential for not only getting a job, but then thriving once it gets there. To Trish's point, there are some similarities in education sector and tech. One thing to get in, but then the whole immune system becomes very hostile in some ways. Mm-hmm. It might not be as much, but there are some similarities, right, Trish?
Yeah. Yes.
That exist.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay. Let's jump into this. And either of you can weigh in first. What is the current level of representation of women and minorities in the tech industries?
I actually had to look it up because it changes so fast, right? And depending on who you're talking to. So right now, about 25% of the tech force are women. compared to 52% in other industries.
Why is that so
It's
low?
actually, say that again.
Why do you think that's so low?
I think that started back in the late 80s, early 90s. You actually saw more women than you do now, but the environment got so hostile, not only in the workplace, but in college. So I went to college from 75 to 79. And even though there were only like 3 women in my cohort, um, there was no hostility there at all. There were me and 2 other Black gentlemen were the only Black people in our cohort, but there was no hostility there. Once we got into the industry and later, that's when that came about. And so, if you can do other things, then you don't want to put up with the tech industry. So we're missing out on a lot of really good talent.
Where did the hostility come from, and what was the genesis of it?
Mostly men, young men who have young men who are, kind of on the spectrum, like really smart guys that women tend to not be attracted to necessarily. And so there's the hostility toward them even being in the space. And then there's also the sense of intellectual superiority, young men feeling like they were much smarter than women. And it just kind of built up, and then people started dropping out. And then you saw the women's movement in tech. I belong to the Hoppers group at Microsoft. It's still there, named after Grace Hopper. And we did a lot of work to get women in tech. And so having those groups really helps to retain people. But it's hard day to day to think about that. I talked to a group of young women from Duke University a couple summers ago, and they're talking about the same things that I heard when I was in industry. They are harassed all the time. Men put their hands on them as if they're their property. They're talked down to all the time. And when you have men in leadership that behave the same way, they're not going to curb that behavior among the people who report to them.
So you mentioned that there's a 75% to 25% representation of male to female. What other groups are underrepresented?
So Blacks and Latinos, Blacks make up about 7%. Latinos make up about 8%. Now that's a high number, but if you were to actually look high relative to when I was there, it was like 2%. I think we might have made it up to 3%. But when you look at Black folks in tech, they're in support roles. They're not necessarily programming. They're in tech support. They're in quality assurance, security, that kind of stuff. So that's a problem, and I think that's true also for Latinos. And then, of course, the reason for that is that we are not even treating Blacks and Latinos well in K through 12 to get them to college in the first place, to get them into industry.
So the problem is systemic.
It is systemic, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. And obviously, some companies are better than others. But there was a trend, and Omar, you probably remember this. There was this trend with startups. So somebody would leave a big company, do a startup, and then they hire all the people who look just like them. And then they would think about diversity only if somebody called them on it. And then when you get hundreds of companies like that, and all of a sudden they get bigger, now you have a systemic problem.
Omar, you want to add anything to that?
I tend to agree. Yeah, most certainly. Look, Trish is spot on, right? So this starts from a lot earlier on, and I would say even K to 12, even before college goes into it. And the stats that I really, ponder over, Trish, and you've come across that, when you look at Black women in tech that occupy executive decision-making roles, that number is still substantially below even 2%. Depending on the stats you look at, it's between 1.3 to 1.8%. And the reason I'm calling that out is if you really want to perpetuate a change, you got to create this beacon of hope or lighthouse where young African American, young Latino women can look up to. And then there's somebody on the table that is sitting there that can perpetuate decisions, that can remove some of the barriers, that can eliminate some of the hostilities that exist. So I think my 2 cents, and each company is different, right? So I think the likes of some of the companies I work for, I think they've done a really good job with diversity and inclusion, a lot better than some of the others. But this number around the industry to be below 2% in executive leadership, I think it's just shameful. That's the easiest way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, other point that Trish brought up, that's spot on too. I think a lot of the culture is male dominated, and when they go and start a company, they bring in folks that look like them, are part of the same culture, or they can work with. And sometimes women are not part of those discussions. And that also, Trish is spot on, because unless somebody calls anybody out on that these days, nobody wants to do the right thing. So I think having a self-accountability is important, but I think having a group accountability is equally important, now more so than ever. We as a society need to come together and appreciate the companies that are doing the right things and call out the ones that don't.
Yeah.
If you're out there, let your fingers run across those keys. We invite your questions as you listen in, and it sparks your concern or your queries. So let me ask you both then, what role has DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, played in the evolution of the tech industry? Has it played a role? Have these companies had DEI policies? Have they been enforced? Have they been adequate? What role has it played? I think we lost.
I think it depends on the company, right?
Okay.
It depends on the company, and some do a better job than others. When I was in the diversity role at Microsoft, I actually left my tech job there to do that internally. And it was in its infancy at the time. And I remember talking to the VP of HR about when I was president of Blacks at Microsoft, talking about asking Microsoft to advertise in Black Enterprise Magazine, Hispanic Engineer Magazine, all of that. And his answer was, well, they all read Business Week and all the tech magazines. Why would we advertise, spend more money? And he missed the entire point of showing that you believe in a particular community by advertising in their tech and their business magazines and telling them you really want them. So
it was about being intentional.
It's about being intentional, but going from that to today, I mean, a lot has changed. Omar, you've been in the business long enough. You've seen a lot of that change.
Oh yeah, Christian, you're spot on. So I think so. My stance is twofold. Like there's a period of some of the luminaries in our industries that have done the right thing because they've seen the society change over the last 30 years. The Generation Z, the millennials, they're also expecting some of those responsibilities, whether it's around environments, whether it's around DEI. But my assessment, which is not based on empirical data here, Trish, but there are a lot of companies that after George Floyd's death and murder jump onto DEI bandwagon. Mm-hmm. And there are many of them. You saw the chief diversity officer roles were popping up everywhere. Everybody was embracing. Black Lives Matter was the best thing, that the CEOs were talking about on their quarterly earning calls of all places, right? Fast forward 4 years, and the election and the sea change you're seeing a lot of them are the first ones to jump off. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to sit here and call those out because anybody can Google search. Ironically, Google was one of those companies that made a pledge right after George Floyd's murder, mm-hmm. and it's probably also one of the first companies, along with Meta and 2 others, that did that. Mm-hmm. And that is the kind of the interesting chapter, Pastor, that we're looking into the tech, industry. That gradually, I'm an optimist, so I would say eventually tech industry gets it right, because I think there are enough evolved people, enough educated people that want to do the right thing. There's enough, I think, diversity compared to some of the other industries. But there's also not a lot of accountability in the environment we are living in. What are your thoughts, Trish, on that, by the way? I'm curious too.
I think when you think about the last few years, all of that clearly was performative. And when the work got hard and they actually had to do something, then that's where everything came to a screeching halt. And I don't know how many companies are going to bring it back or actually try to do something a little different. It is expensive. I will give them that, because you're talking about having an entire team of people run DEI in your organization. That expense is worth it if you actually do what they tell you to do. Right. And that is the challenge right now, is not wanting to put in the actual work. It's not about a couple of classes. It's not about a couple of information sessions. And it's not even about hiring people of color and women. It's really about, once you get folks there, like how you actually include them in every level of decision making relative to their role. And when you keep excluding them and not punishing the people, to your point, for violating that, it just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. So now it looks like a waste of money, when really it's about people not wanting to put in the effort.
And I get that, not wanting to put in the effort. People like Zonderberg doesn't want to put in, doesn't want to spend the money. I get that. But how much of it is people not believing and not understanding that a diverse workforce that looks like the society in which they're making their money and selling their products actually makes them better? I mean, we're getting ready to have the Super Bowl. Can you imagine the NFL without the black players?
Right.
Not even the most racist person in the world wants to see an all-white NFL. First of all, the game's going to be very slow, and not much is going to happen in the end zone after a touchdown.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. And the quarterbacks, ain't going to be no, maybe with the exception of Josh Allen, ain't going to be no quarterback running for a first down if nobody's open. So it's going to be a different game. Can you imagine the NBA without the black players? Can you imagine Hollywood without, the music world without Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, and on and on and on and on? So in the tech world, is it just really white men trying to hold on to privilege and dominance and not wanting to compete? Is that, at the end of the day, is that what we're facing more than anything else, in addition to just the laziness of not wanting to put in the work and just the greed of the bottom line is my bottom line?
Pastor, all the industries you mentioned are consumer-based. So it actually is easy and makes sense to have a diverse workforce. But when you talk about tech, they have the "if it ain't broke, don't fix it" mentality, until they do something stupid with a customer-facing part of their work and they get sued. Then all of a sudden they care about it. And they only care about it because they don't want to get sued again.
Give me an example.
So when I was at Microsoft and they were starting to release the consumer products, and this is about the time they had that operating system called Bob, which was a hot mess. But they were talking about the good old times, and they had like the 1950s and the white people with their little lunch baskets and getting in their convertible and all this stuff. This is what they used to advertise. They caught so much hell from so many people who saw that, because we know in the 50s, for us as Black people, that was not the good old times. And something as simple as having people within the company, or even hiring consultants or something to look at those customer-facing things, could have solved all that. So now they had to do a whole lot of work with their marketing department and all that. And then they started changing how they release their consumer-based products. So you're talking about a company that prior to that was all about servers and business systems, right? And it doesn't matter, you never saw any characters, any people, anything like that on the user interface, all you saw were letters and controls. So all of a sudden they're moving into consumer products, and that's a whole different ballgame, but they didn't prepare themselves for that. Even though we still had, our diversity groups and all that, we were all available to be there to help, but they didn't ask for it because they didn't know to ask. So that's an innocent case.
Okay.
I am sure there are somewhere they just said, oh, forget it. We're just going to go ahead and do it. And then ended up getting in trouble.
What do you say to those folks who suggest that when you have DEI programs, when you're intentional about diversity and equity inclusion, that you end up with less qualified employees, that you have to lower your standards because these minorities and women coming in, that they're not as competent as these white guys that have been there? Because that's the inference of what they say, that if you have a DEI program, you fundamentally have a weaker workforce, and the very presence of minorities says that your standards are lower. Is there any truth to that?
Homer, I'm going to leave that one to you. You're in it day to day now.
Look, here's what my perspective is. I think this is number one, a farce. It's like something perpetuated by folks that don't want to do the right thing. And I would say even people with, my heritage and my background would not be walking around in tech sector if it wasn't for H-1B visa and the cost structure that exists that you can hire talented people for paying them half the salary. So my 2 cents over here is it really comes down to short-term gains and profitability, number one. And number two, what it comes down to is you can still have a really high bar. I mean, and, run people through the same drills that you will run through. Mm-hmm. What it comes down to is you have to be intentional, number one. You have to put the guardrails and framework. So once you hire folks, you're able to retain them, train them. Because this whole hostility stuff that Tricia was talking about, that's very true. It's one thing to bring in folks, and then if you don't protect them from the immune system, if you know what I'm talking about here, mm-hmm. They're not going to last there too long. So my 2 cents out of this is DEI, if anything, and it's proven time and time again, it increases the company's baseline. It opens them up to customers that are diverse. It brings in diverse ideas. I mean, it's a well-publicized case of Microsoft Connect, where it was not able to detect people of dark skin. Mm. And why that happened? Well, there are many, many reasons, but Pastor, you might get a kick out of it. They obviously didn't have any person with dark skin on their team. So all the testing they were doing earlier on were people with light skin. So what I'm saying is this is just one in many, many examples that exist. If you don't have diverse ideas, how are you going to go and serve customers who are diverse? So that's just a smart decision to make. That's my 2 cents. Back to you, Trish.
Yeah, I also think that there's that assumption that every white man is highly qualified. And that's not true, right? So it makes it easier if you can say to the white man manager, hire your friends for this new department, which is essentially what they've been given license to do. Mm-hmm. And so they bring in mostly white guys with the occasional man of color, never Black, never Latino. And then you end up with the same thing, right? And there is no different perspective. What HR needs to do is say, we're going to control the pool. And we're going to go out and find the most talented people with variety of backgrounds, variety of race, et cetera. And then all things being equal, if 75% of your team is white men, we're going to pick the Black woman candidate who rose to the top and who is equal to the other white guy, because we cannot add another white guy. They're both equally talented, can fit into the culture, et cetera. But once you leave it to the manager who wants somebody who they're comfortable with, the Black woman doesn't have a chance. in that scenario, right? So that's the intentionality. It's the same thing with promotions. If you are in a room full of leaders who are talking about who needs to be promoted, and all those leaders look the same and their teams look the same, sans maybe 2 or 3% of their team, they're always going to pick the people who they can relate to and who they spend time with. And so you as a person of color or a white woman, like, you don't stand a chance. Now, there are managers who are really good. And fortunately for me, I worked with, I had that mix in all of my career of managers who were really good and really got it, and managers who just were terrible. And for me, I left the managers who were terrible and went and looked for a different job within the company, just for my own sanity. And I actually had no idea that now that I'm older, I realize why I did that. I was not happy. But I always looked at it as, I'm not happy in this job in this moment. I never looked at it as, and I should have, because I probably would have been a lot healthier, as a mental health challenge for me if I had to put up with abuse every day, right? So to me, the easiest way is to just leave, go get to another manager.
I think I think the reality of programs like affirmative action and DEI, they are tactics to try and correct systems that have been inherently racist and patriarchal from the beginning, and that's their DNA. Their default is to exclude anything other than white men, and that they have no history of being more inclusive than that unless they're forced.
Yes.
And it's why the NFL can be 78% African American players, but then only 6 out of 32 coaches, and that's a 100% increase in 4 years, because 4 years ago there was only 3. And in D1 NCAA football, out of 267 D1 programs, there were only 16 black coaches, and yet in the Final Four, in the semifinal playoff games, 2 of the 4 coaches were black. So there were 16 out of 267, and 2 of those 16 end up being in the Final Four. We overperform.
Yes.
And when you have to be, we're not less than, when there's that much resistance, once you get in, I mean, how long was it before an African-American woman could get into women's gymnastics, and now who's the GOAT?
Right.
Just that quickly.
Right.
What happened when you turned the tiger loose into the country club? And when you let a couple of sisters in on the tennis court? That's why
everybody's afraid.
Exactly. And so to start from the standpoint that Pete Hegseth is the best qualified candidate because he's a white male, and then contrast him with a General Austin that he's coming behind, you see black brilliance and white male mediocrity.
Yes.
That without discrimination, he's the one who never would get in the room.
That's right.
Just like the president. Without being born to a father who can give you $287 million to continue to clean up after your one bust after another, you never get in the room because you're not really that good. We have some questions coming in.
Yeah, this is real quick. When we look at the changes and the issues that are going with DEI today, we look at this as more of an attack on everything that helps us move forward in our communities. When you look at the fact that they're trying to bring in $20 billion from Saudi Arabia or one of those countries over there to build AI server farms in Texas and Kansas and all these other places. How are all these changes affecting your organization? And did you have to change any parts of your operations to try to suit what's going on?
Ooh.
That's way above my pay grade.
We're having this conversation today. As probably as recent as 10 years ago, I talked a lot about having gone to bed, being conflicted about working hard to get our Black and brown babies into an industry that doesn't want them. But it's an industry where they belong, and they should have a right to show their talent. And as the years have gone by, it just seems to have gotten worse and worse. But I feel like we have to push more young people into the industry, make sure they're extra prepared. Otherwise, things won't change. They're not going to change from the people who are already there. They have to almost be forced to see how talented and brilliant our kids are. So we're continuing what I always say, stick to our knitting. We are going to keep sticking to our knitting and being very well aware of what's in front for our kids and make sure we prepare them. You know, back in the day when we first started our internship program, we used to tell kids in the job readiness, you'll go into this company, you're going to be the only person of color. You're certainly going to be the youngest because we're talking about 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. And those white kids over there wearing shorts and flip-flops, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You have to come in dressed, not in a suit or anything, but you have to have real clothes on. Mm-hmm. You can't do everything they do because somebody is going to look down on you and going to call you less than, even though you're doing the same thing as the guy across the hall. And we kept talking to them about that and making sure that they were really prepared. And that's what we have to do now, continue to do going forward. They have to be ready. They have to have some sort of a shell because we're not going to be able to change that environment that they're going into. We have to create critical mass so that that environment changes.
You mentioned going and being conflicted, sending them into industries where they're not wanted. Other than the service industry and agriculture, is there an industry where that is not normative, where there's some resentment for us being there? Isn't that kind of normative?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. We not only have to have the talent, we have to have a fortitude because you're dealing with a headwind and not a tailwind. You don't have legacy like kids going into a school because their father went there and their grandfather. And they don't see that as preferential treatment, but don't let you get a Pell Grant or something.
Right.
And so they not only have to have the fortitude that the others don't have, but they also have to understand, and you mentioned something that I tried to explain to my son and daughter, that there's a double standard. You can't do the same things they do. You're going to be subject to a certain judgment. If you get upset and get angry, they're going to call security. If a white guy does it, boys will be boys.
Yes. And I think the important thing to tell our young people is to find that place that you're going to be welcome. They do exist. You know, it's not a hot mess fully. Those places do exist. My oldest boy is a programmer for Figma, and he is having a wonderful career. He's been there 3 years. Omer, have you used Figma?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Their environment there is amazing. And I'm nervous when he's thinking about, you know, at some point, he's not going to stay there his entire career. He's only 24. But when it's time for him to go, I worry about where he's going to end up.
Kevin, you got another question?
Yeah, last question. We always concentrate on people after they get out of high school. But in a world that seems to not care about educating people of color, how do we, as a community, make sure that our children K through 12 get the education they need in order to prepare them for college and beyond for the tech industry?
Well, I think Trish and Omar have been talking about that throughout the program, but you guys want to add anything to that?
Omar?
Hey, look, my perspective has been that, it starts from household. It starts from the thought leaders, the role models. And I think we need to be very deliberate because we're about to go through a seismic shift, courtesy of AI. So this is the inflection point that happens once every 200 years, if you go back historically. So whether it was the big industrial revolution the farming, keeps on going back. We are looking at an inflection point which can allow people of color to get that playing field back on their side, essentially. But it will start with education. It will start with some deliberation. It will start with role models. And part of a reason why I'm really proud to be part of this program that we're running at the AI Lab, 60% of our students are female, predominantly Black and Latinos.
I love it.
And hope over here is that they're going to go home, they're going to educate, and they're going to perpetuate, they're going to incite others to consider looking into it. But STEM education, role models, and having a deliberate point of view to say, hey, this AI is not something to be scared of. We need to take the reins off it in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in our state, we have not defined what it means to be a well-educated student in Washington State. We have not funded our schools properly. And then when you think about kids, every single adult from home to school to community has a role in making sure that they get everything they need. And we as adults have dropped the ball. We're still saying things like, well, I wasn't good at math, so I don't expect you to be good at math. Would we ever say that about reading? No, right? And then we also don't turn our kids over to a school and not be involved. Like that's a recipe for failure for our kids, because we need to make sure that our teachers, our principals know that we are there for our kids, that we care. And then within our community, we need to be doing some things. And we have a lot of different community organizations, TAF included, that are doing great work outside of the school. But somewhere we need to come together to make sure that within individual communities, that kids are getting everything they need. And not, I got mine for my kid, I got my kid in this program, we're good. You know, just because your kid is good, they're going to a school where there are a lot of kids that aren't necessarily good in terms of being supported and all that. So we need to make sure that we come together, because nobody else is going to do this for us. The public education system is not going to do it for us. And in fact, I would argue public education is not about kids at all. It's a very large jobs program. And we need to change that to make sure that everybody is focused on what's best for our kids.
So what do the two of you anticipate in the coming years in the tech industry as a microcosm of the overall economy? The policies from this current presidential administration, is there a purge going on? Are they attempting that? It seems to me they're trying to re-landscape the industry. And so what do you anticipate is going to be the impact of these policies, and what can and should we do at the local level and at the federal level to mitigate some of the backward advance?
If I may, it's a tough question, Pastor. Look, there are two elements that are going to take place, and they're already taking place. One is just the utter discouragement of people of color to even think or consider applying in tech, whether it's the CEO of Meta telling that we got to make the organizations more masculine, to just outright shutting down of many of the DEI programs that is taking place. I've had many students that actually approach me from the program and say, hey, do we actually even have a place anymore in tech? So there's that psychological, glass that is shattered that, behooves all of us as leaders in the community, folks like yourself, Trish, and others, to keep on rallying the troops over here and encouraging them that, this is a short-term thing. Hopefully elections are only 4 years, and this is the last time he can run. The second element over here, I'm going to expect that there are organizations that are not going to be blatant, disrespectful to the cultural norms and what this country stands for. And they are going to come forward with embracing diversity as they have been, and they're going to be the ones leading. Now, hopefully here, that will be enough to survive the next 4 years, us doing what we need to do. and hopefully, folks within many states in the blue states will make sure that DEI is not eroded, equality is not eroded.
Mhm.
What do you think, Trish?
That saying, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
Mm-hmm.
We're at that place right now. And I think about when my mom and her siblings raised me and my cousins, they didn't know anything about college because none of them even got out of grade school because they had to go and labor. But they knew that was the thing. And they told us we can do anything we put our mind to. And they did everything to give us everything they had to prepare us. But they really didn't know what was on the other side. And that's how I feel like we are right now. We're preparing our kids every day for some kind of career. It could be in tech, it could be in any medicine, anything. But we're preparing them so that they're not going in there blind. And we're giving them a lot of confidence and we're putting a lot of weight in their vision of what they want to do. So I was at Roosevelt Elementary in Tacoma, one of our partners, and they had their exhibition of learning. And for first graders, as they talk about what careers they want. So they were building, so they researched the careers and they use Legos to build the office in which they are going to work. And so keeping that mindset of, I can do this. I could be a vet, I could be a firefighter, I could be a doctor, I could be any of these things. We got to keep that going so that our kids stay ready so they don't have to get ready when they are adults.
Is it fair to say then that each of us, not just somebody like myself who stands in the pulpit on Sunday morning, but people like you and Omar are people who have to be messengers of hope, as well as people who are training people with specific skills and sagacity, because it's, I've listened to interviews on TV with people in Ecuador and Peru who wanted to come to this country, and the message of Trump has gotten to them: don't even try it, don't even come. But internally, there's no place for us to go, because I think he's also sending a message internally: we don't want you.
Right.
But we can't go anyplace else. So it seems to me that no matter what we're doing, people are being demoralized and deflated and can be mentally defeated, so they don't even try. Is it incumbent upon all of us to understand that part of our job right now is to be a messenger of hope?
We have to be a messenger of hope, and the adults or young adults that we may be working with have to receive that message. It's a two-way street. Like, we can have that message of hope, but if they don't believe, so we have to put the structures up under them to keep them believing. And that's why, for me, that K through 12 space is really important, because you've got to start them young believing. You can't ignore, and then all of a sudden in high school, you're like, oh, what do you want to be? Let's get you ready. It's too late at that point. You have to start early. So yes, we all have to be that beacon of hope. We all should be grabbing some young person's arm and saying, hey, I'm here for you. I could be your mentor. We can't just leave kids hanging and act like everything is going to be all right later.
Omari, final words?
Yeah, no, Pastor, you hit it on the spot. And just to echo what Chris said, that I think it's a two-way street. I personally believe that, my purpose and my function, and those in the community, is to, some ways, be that inspiration, is to be that encouragement sound. But yeah, I do tend to believe what Trish is saying, that, you can say the message, somebody's got to be willing to receive it. So I think it's a two-way street, but we got to start first, and we got to start now.
Well, we have had a great and informative conversation here with Trish Melendez-Zico and Omari Kreshi. I think I did I get it right?
You got it.
I crushed it or crushed it? I want to thank the both of you for being here. this evening to talk about this subject. You know, there's so much out there right now. There's so many groups that are just anxious because there's so many negative messages being sent to so many different communities. And, you know, things have a way of causing the opposite of the impact that you intended. You know, there's a Bible verse that says, you mean it for evil, but God means it for good. And I have a feeling that some of these bombs that are being detonated is going to create a great coalition of consciousness and goodwill. That's what I'm hoping, that the God of history that stands within the shadows, keeping watch above her own, is going to step from behind those shadows and bring justice and compassion back to this land. Sometimes it takes a fool to get some good going. Let's hope that that be the case. But I want to thank you guys for coming here tonight and being messengers of hope as it relates to one of the most critical industries going forward in the world in which we currently live. So thank you. Answer my calls when I call you in the future, because I know I'm going to be calling you to come back and come back soon. I want to say to everybody out there, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Conversations with the Pastor. Join us next week here, same bat time, same bat channel. Take care of yourself, take care of your wealth, take care of your loved ones, and listen to the words of the R&B prophet in the appendix to the Bible right after Revelations, Don Cornelius, who says, peace and love.
Thank you for joining Conversations with the Pastor here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. You can also join us for worship service at 9:30 a.m. on Sundays. Listen, don't miss out. We'll see you next week.